Hi, and welcome to the Collector's Edge from Nordic Art Partners. In this episode, we will explore the work and career of Knoebel, a German artist known for his unique forms and colors. With me today is, as usual, our arts expert Nicholas Robinson, and I'm your host, Jeppe. Let's get started.
It is with Alex Rotter at 400 million, selling here at Christie's. $400 million is the bid, and the piece is sold.
We've all heard about it. Sometimes it's front page news. Important works of art are being sold for incredible sums of money. But can you get involved and become a part of the exclusive club yourself? And how do you get started while avoiding buying the wrong things? That's exactly what this podcast is about. This is The Collector's Edge from Nordic Art Partners, a podcast for those of you interested in the mechanics of the art industry, want advice about putting money into art, or simply want to buy something for your walls to beautify your surroundings. Whatever your objectives, it is possible to put money into art wisely, to be considered, thoughtful, and well-informed in your choices and actions. Welcome to the art of collecting, with an eye for curated beauty and practical value.
Hi, Nick.
Good morning, Jeppe.
Good morning. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. You?
Yeah, I'm good. It's been a long time since we last sat down and spoke about an artist.
True. We've been traveling and going to some art fairs and so on and so forth. So back in the office. I almost said back in the studio, but yeah. Obviously our
same.
Our office is our studio.
Yeah, and it's not because we don't have artists to talk about. We're just sometimes busy.
Yes,
that's how it is. But as I just mentioned in the intro, we're going to talk about Knoebel today.
Yes, we are.
Can you, as always, give us a little tour back in his early days and how he became an artist?
Sure. I think probably we should do what we usually do, and that's just give a bit of biographical context to start with.
Yes, please.
Before we talk about his education and his work, etc., etc. Imi was born in 1940 in Dessau. Dessau being notable as the site of the original Bauhaus, founded in 1918. So, of course, that makes him 84 years old, for all you mathematics aficionados. When he was 5 years old, he was in Dresden towards the culmination of the Second World War, where he witnessed the firebombing of the city, and a few years later, in 1950, he was one of 5 children in total, and at the end of the war, his father abandoned them. So his mother, raising 5 children after 5 years of the sort of post-war Soviet occupation, she started to become extremely concerned as to what life under a communist regime would look like. And so they fled. They fled to West Germany. And he remembers running through the fields in the dead of night with the sound of the border guard dogs sort of barking at their heels, as he describes it. So anyway, he settled in the West, and then I guess at some point during his childhood, his formative years, he decided that he wanted to become an artist. Should we talk about what his work is like? Should we talk about I guess we should talk about his education, maybe.
Yeah, I think if you could tell us a bit about his art education and what formative influence he has and on the work we know from him.
Yes.
Maybe also a little bit about the Bauhaus.
Okay, that's fair enough. Of course, he was not attending the Bauhaus, but it's kind of pertinent, or the philosophies around the Bauhaus become pertinent when we think of the things that he was taught at art school. But I guess just to summarize his work generally, he's always been very dedicated to a purely non-representational form of art. He's one of these artists who's been very resolute in his abstraction, concerning form, which in his case is articulated predominantly by line, by color, but also by material. And these are themes that he has experimented with throughout his working life in series. He's always aimed to uncover the basic material elements of art, and had been inspired by especially the work of Mandarin and Malevich, both of whom were innovators and proponents of the very first highly formal theories of abstraction in the early 20th century. So anyway, in 1962, he attended the Werkundschule in Darmstadt. And the key factor here in his education was the course, which was very closely based on what was called the preliminary course at the Bauhaus. And this was formulated by two particular professors there, one of whom was Johannes Itten, and the other was Laszlo Mohly-Nagy. Now, Itten had various philosophies surrounding color and became a bit of a sort of a mystical figure. So he was very interested in the spiritual properties of color and so on and so forth. But in 1922, I believe, he was replaced by Mohly-Nagy, who had a much more sort of constructivist leaning towards color and composition. Anyway, the foundation course, the preliminary course, as formulated by Itten and refined by Mohly-Nagy, looked at various theories about color and looked at contrast amongst color by hue, by value, by temperature, by saturation. So they had very specific intellectual theories on composition and painting, and this highly didactic approach was the course, essentially, that Knoebel was taught in Darmstadt. So he had this founding in Bauhaus way of thinking about color and composition. So you can trace his education in this direct lineage. After this, he attended the Kunstakademie in Dusseldorf. And this was a little bit interesting because the teacher at the Kunstakademie in Dusseldorf was Joseph Beuys. And Joseph Beuys is sort of this monumental figure in German post-war art. And the way that Knoebel tells it, he had to persuade Beuys to enroll him in the course. He had a very close friend, Knoebel, called Rainer Giese. And they were this sort of two peas in a pod kind of friends. They called themselves Imi and Imi, which was a little bit of a way that they kind of branded themselves or identified themselves. And the way they described it, the way he describes, he said that he saw in a newspaper that Beuys had been attacked at an art opening. So he read this article in a newspaper, saw the photograph of the bloodied nose of this artist, and was very fascinated by what had prompted people to react so strongly to his work to the extent that they attacked him. So he they felt compelled that they had to sort of help this man, although, of course, what that would mean to them is unclear. But so they packed their bags, they hitchhiked to Dusseldorf, and they managed to get an audience somehow with Joseph Beuys. And the way that Knoebel tells it, he says, "We had absolutely no talent, but we mustered the courage to approach him. When there's two of you, you only need half the courage. And we told him we didn't want to show our art, we just wanted him to give us a room of our own. He was both taken aback and sold on our cheekiness. So basically, Beuys gave them a place to work. He gave them a room called Raum 19, room 19, next door to his own classroom in room 20. And he basically gave them a year to prove themselves. He said, here you go, here's a space in which to work, justify why you should still be here in a year's time. And you have all this time to formulate something to do that would enable you to deserve to stay here. So the first thing that Knoebel did, or the first major body of work that he formulated. Although I guess before we talk about his actual work, we should talk about maybe a little bit about his struggle to become an artist. I think that a lot of artists probably, when they're making very, especially very rigidly reductive, abstract works, it's very difficult to find a way to map out new territory. You're dealing with very sort of pared back means of making a painting. So it's a little bit difficult to know where you can take the medium. And Knoebel was no different. Initially, he was a little tortured by the sense that he could not find a way to do something that had not already been done. He noted that Klein had his monochromes and his International Klein Blue. He noted that Fontana had mapped out the slashes as a way of, interrogating the pictorial surface. And he felt, what's left? If you want to do something to stay alive, you have to think of something at least as radical. And he wasn't sure what that might look like for him. And he always would refer to his discovery of Malevich's Black Square of 1915 as a very seminal moment in his own understanding of what art could be. And he always said that considering the painting gave him an overwhelming feeling that I could start at nothing. So when he made his first body of work, his first significant piece, this is what he did. So Room 19 is the name given to this piece of work that he formulated during this 12 months of his studenthood in Dusseldorf. And this piece consists of 77 elements of wood and masonite. So think of all of the things that look like they are the sort of raw materials of a painting. Stretchers, frames, various planar support surfaces. So Knoebel is assembling these things, reducing the core elements of painting to its very essence, distilling it into its basic constituent components of form, material, surface, and the way they coexist in space. But the interesting thing is that no actual paint is part of this work. So because you have this sort of very obvious physicality to these elements, he's bringing painting very close to the phenomenology of sculpture. And the interesting thing about this group of paintings, which of course are not really paintings, is that there's no fixed set of relationships that binds these components, since Room 19 can be arranged in any kind of variation, any kind of permutation, stacked together, arranged so it can be composed to sort of fill a certain specific space, composed within that space, so to speak, or it can be densely compacted as if it were simply stored away somewhere. So it's sort of maybe an autobiographic reference to an art student's basic materials, but as an installation, it's really a conceptual exercise in reduction, pairing the work of art back to its most basic physical elements. So this is his attitude towards, how can I make a painting that is the very essence of a painting, and a way of making something maybe that had not been made before.
Can you say that Knoebel's work are often seen as a dialogue between a painting and a sculpture?
Yes, they have a very specific sort of physical property, partly due to his interest in materials.
Could you try to describe how they could be look like in terms of these
of course. Another group of works that he made in his early days, between 1966, which of course predates his studies in Dusseldorf, and 1973, he made 250,000 A4 drawings, all executed in pencil, with various vertical, horizontal lines on them. And this was exhibited in 6 high, narrow steel cupboards, all of which are sealed and only accessible on demand. So here you have abstract work that also has a sort of a performative element in its physicality. It functions as sculpture, it functions as installation, and it functions as also a highly conceptual exercise. But continuing his very key concept of dematerializing the medium of painting, in 1968, Knoebel was the first of Beuys's students to incorporate photography in his work. So he started using a slide projector, and he would take the slides, and he would just have these empty slides, whatever the material, acetate or acrylic or whatever the little plastic square is. And he would put these slides in the projector, and he would create squares of light that were essentially the empty slide projected onto a wall. So this is, of course, putting a composition on a wall, which of course is akin to a painting, but obviously there's this conceptual, this kind of sculptural, performative element to it too. These later evolved into slides that were covered in copy ink, onto which he carved very precise vertical, horizontal lines, which were then cast throughout the room. And this very, very reductive form of exploring form, line and form, evolved into his black and white paintings. And these were very simple paintings, consisting of black and white abstract works, essentially, that played with various combinations of rectangular forms on their surface. So extremely simple and extremely pared back. But our understanding of Knoebel, of course, and of course this also relates back to the first course that he was taught, the Bauhaus course on color theory, etc. We associate his work today with very sophisticated explorations of color, right?
Yes, especially the Anima Mundi works. But these works you just mentioned, are they essential for understanding his artistic vision, or is there maybe also other group of works that's important?
Well, I think they're essential to understand his evolution towards perhaps what we more readily associate with his work today. And you mentioned the Anima Mundi works, which are, a very kind of sophisticated essay that perhaps represent a culmination of all of these different concerns and considerations that he considers relevant to the practice, to the discipline of painting. But before he made those, we have to discover his. We have to understand his discovery and his use of color. Now, he was part of a great generation of German artists that all kind of came up together, exploring painting in somewhat similar, of course, also different ways. But in 1977, he experienced a significant trauma with the death of his very close friend, Blinky Palermo. And after Blinky died, he began to systematically experiment with color, and he made a very key work in response to Blinky's death. Now Palermo had become known as quite a sophisticated colorist. His paintings most often his work is most often noted for these paintings that consist of these three horizontal bands of color that have some kind of relation to each other. So there's a certain harmony in them, but there's also a certain awkwardness in the way these colors, these tones relate to each other. Very sort of hard-edged, flat passages of color. So they really just kind of look like flags, you might say, and not like paintings at all. But Palermo had been considered quite a sophisticated colorist. So Knoebel's response to this this sort of highly significant moment, he sort of turned a profound personal loss into a kind of artistic legacy from Palermo to him. And so this body of work that he made in response to Palermo's death, 24 Colors for Blinky, consists of 24 irregular sort of polygon shapes, funny kind of cutouts that defy a particular description or categorization, each with a solid color on the surface. And this work only really functions if you kind of stand in the middle and consider all of these shapes and colors resonating together. It becomes a very sort of experiential way to perceive color and form. And this is now part of the permanent collection at Deer Beacon.
So Imi is 84 years old today.
Yeah.
And you just walked us through many of the different series he made through his whole career. Mm-hmm. Which one do you prefer?
Well, I think that for me, I suppose we haven't gotten to that point yet in our talk. for me, I think that his essays in colour are my personal favourites, and what I think probably will end up being his most significant legacy. I mean, the early historic works will always be that, just because of their, the significance of their importance to the development of his work. But I think his work of the last, 20, 30 years is more significant because it incorporates all of these elements in a more rounded way. And I think, we can't overstate the importance of colour to Knoebel. Today he's got more than 700 colour cards arranged in his studio. All of them are highly ordered on these sort of hooks in his studio, each one on a hook adjacent to the next one, very, closely related tones in this spectrum, looking like the keys on some kind of crazy monumental xylophone. So the nuance of colour and the relationship of tones to other tones is something that he obviously thinks about constantly. And since the 1990s, when he has begun to paint on aluminium, I think that the combination of this sort of very industrial material surface support with the painting that he makes on top, to me, make the most interesting works. And for me, the works that he's made, a lot of these aluminium works from the 90s, or that he started in the 90s, he still makes them today. They have a sort of a anthropomorphic or biomorphic shape to them. So they're kind of an irregular form. And then the surface is painted, often in a monochrome, but sometimes with expressive gestural elements in slightly related or contrasting tones too. So you get quite a lot of variations of the same color in complementary shades or tones, and these marks are applied in this very sort of feathered, brushy way, which has a lot of expression in it. So you have this shaped ground that superficially is reminiscent of minimalist works by Americans such as Ellsworth Kelly or Frank Stella. But the surface differs very markedly in that Knoebel's works much more clearly retain the hand of the artist in the gestural way the paint is applied to the surface. So these paintings become about the material and the surface support, but also very much about the configurations of brushstrokes on the surface, which are incredibly subtle, but also still quite expressive and quite visceral. So I think that these are a very significant body of work that Knoebel has made. And then another series that I think is highly significant, and I think probably the market generally agrees, are the Anima Mundi works. Now, Anima Mundi, very loosely translated, means, or very literally translated, means soul of the world. But for Knoebel, I think we can infer that this is a certain kind of artistic soul of the world, and the very sort of pure response to form and color and the way these two elements sort of interact with each other. And each of these Anima Mundi works, very simple, consists of a rectangular aluminium panel, and each one has a sort of a strip on the top and on the sides, so like a band around the edge, functioning as a framing device around the central rectangle. And each of these panels is between sort of 35 and 40 centimeters tall. And these works are configured in groups of 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 panels. And these are hung in a row, horizontal row on the wall, so that these various panels relate to their siblings in any given group. And a few minutes ago, I spoke about the dimensions of these individual panels being between, I think, 35 and 40 centimeters. The reason that there's a small range between them with any individual group of Anima Mundi works, so if it's a 3-panel work or a 2-panel work or a 5-panel work, each of those panels within any given work is are the same size. But the dimensions vary very slightly from one group to another group. And this is so that none of the individual panels could ever be sort of inadvertently mistaken or switched out for any other that are part of any specific group. Knoebel has very specifically composed the groupings, made each panel very rigorously relate to the others in its group, and if you have these small variations in size from one Anima Mundi group to another, then that, of course, negates the possibility of different panels being erroneously hung together, forming a group that was not intended to be a group. And what you have these sort of, the repetition of the geometric constructions, and of course, the more panels you have, the more permutations you can see in the different colors that he deploys in all of the different compositional elements on any given panel and across all the panels. So the interesting thing about them, like with the 24 colors for Blinky, is that you stand in front of these, and also I should say the solid colors that are painted on these elements of the Anima Mundi panels, they are also quite loosely painted. I mean, when you stand back from them, they appear to be a very solid color, but when you scrutinize them more closely, you can see a lot of nuance, handwork in the way the brushwork is on the surface. So you get this harmony, and you get this dissonance between the colors, and then you get this sort of strange sensation that's almost a vibration. And this is very much what he intended for the viewer to perceive.
Can you mention the galleries representing Knoebel, and maybe also if some markets have higher demand of his works than others?
Yes, I think that. I mean, I would say that maybe a way to put it might be that he's still quite a European artist. I would say his main galleries certainly are in Europe, and we can get to why that is in a second, perhaps. But he has 3 galleries. I mean, he has many galleries that have shown his work, that do continue to show his work. But I would say 3 core galleries that form the bedrock of his representation, and they would be in no particular order. They would be Thaddeus Ropac, von Barther, and White Cube. White Cube predominantly in London. Ropac founded in Salzburg, but also in London, but I suppose quite noted for their spaces in Paris. And then von Barther is a very long-standing gallery with an impeccable pedigree, based out of Basel, also with an offshoot actually here in Copenhagen. And these 3 galleries have, steadfastly represented Knoebel's work for quite some time, and I guess have been the ones that, invariably take his work to most of the fairs and have, hosted most of the important exhibitions in the last 20, 30 years between them. And then I think that there's probably a lack of a major gallery in New York. And I think this is one of the things that is sort of interesting to us, because, we buy the work because we think it's, extraordinarily important and influential work of its type. But we also feel that it is underappreciated by the market at large. And I think if he had a major New York gallery pushing the work in the same way that these European galleries had done, then I would say that his status on the secondary market perhaps would be, and on the auction block would be higher than it is now. You know what his auction record is? Yeah, of course you do.
Yeah, it's $461,000.
Yeah,
for a 2.5 meter 170.
Yeah, and that painting is a 80s painting, I think, a late 80s painting maybe.
It was the work. Well, the auction record was in 2016.
Yeah, but the painting that
it is for 1989.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
Grace Kelly.
Yes, exactly. And Grace Kelly it looks like a sort of a precursor to Anima Mundi.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Look very much alike.
Yeah. So it has the same reductive elements and the same relationship internal relationship between the form and the color components of the work. But to go back to his auction record, $461,000. Now, this is a lot of money by any standards. But when you look at his sort of peers, especially the artists that perhaps could be considered to have extremely parallel careers to him and are no more or no less important than Knoebel. But Günter Ferg is an artist who has very similar parallels in terms of how in terms of what the consensus is regarding his importance, his achievements, etc. Certainly, his place in museums, in institutions, is very similar. But Ferg's auction record is $1.7 million, and he shows with Hauser and Wirth. And so I imagine that there are many paintings, significant historic paintings, that they have sold that are probably significantly in excess of this $1.7 million. But Ferg is dead. And as is often the case, when these sort of elder statesmen and women artists pass on, there's a sort of a reappraisal of their contribution and a fresh understanding about what they've achieved, and a spike of interest that tends to drive a better understanding of their value, which of course, means many things: inherent value, monetary value. But when the inherent value sort of appreciation goes up, then inevitably the market prices goes up too. So anyway, Ferg, his prices have gone up a lot posthumously. But Blinky Palermo, who died in 1977, and so there's been a long time between then and now, which has allowed a very powerful mythology, legend to develop around him and his work. And his auction record is more than $6 million. So, there's no real reason why Knoebel's prices are the way they are, but we feel like we can identify various sort of capricious reasons in the market as to why that's the case. But this obviously suggests that this won't endure forever, and that buying his work probably is a good value proposition to do today as a result of this.
Yeah, makes sense. For this episode, I calculated the annual growth rate from Knoebel's artworks by comparing price per square centimeters from early sales on auctions. 32 years ago was the first sales.
Okay, so all auction sales over 32 years.
Yes, so it's secondary market, not primary market.
And so therefore it will be publicly available auction records.
Yes, and using this, I estimated an average annual increase on his prices, or growth, you can say, on 4.8% over time, showing that Knoebel's value has grown steadily in the art market. Okay. This is secondary work prices, or secondary market, right? Yeah. And also the auction result was in 2016, so 8 years ago. What does this tell us about his growth, but also that 8 years ago he has his auction record, and what does it also tell us compared to primary prices?
Well, okay, so this methodology of yours goes back to the first available auction record 32 years ago.
Yes,
and it shows 4.8% growth per year.
Yes.
So what is that total sort of growth over the time span?
That is 367%.
Okay,
over
so getting on for 400%. Well, of course, we have inflation, so the price and the values of things goes up inevitably over time. But we obviously can see, therefore, that his appreciation within the market has fantastic longevity and has been certainly nothing other than completely stable, showing solid growth over that time. But his primary market prices, vary from, sort of 50,000 euros or so for a small panel. These biomorphic works that I described with the painterly surface, you can get one that's maybe sort of 40, 50 centimeters for around that price, maybe 60,000 euros. And then they go up to, 300,000 or thereabouts for the very large ones, 2.5 odd meters tall. The Anima Mundis are obviously varying in price depending on how many panels are in any given constellation. So one panel maybe is sort of 50,000, 45,000 euros. There's a small economy of scale for 2, which is maybe 75, 80,000 euros, 3, etc., etc. I've seen 5-panel Anima Mundis, which are actually the rarest type, but of course the most sophisticated type because of the variation that you get. You get a lot of painting across these 5 panels, and you get a very highly elucidated experience of everything that Knoebel is trying to achieve and trying to communicate. So I've seen 5-panel works for as much as 250, 260,000 euros. But probably on the primary market, they're still going to be under 200,000. So, obviously the primary market prices and the secondary market prices, there's not a massive discrepancy between them, but there are clear signs that people are trying to sort of future-proof the prices. They're aware that he's very old. They're aware that he doesn't make very many Anima Mundi works anymore. They're aware that maybe there's very many fewer 5-panel, 4-panel works than 2 and 3, whatever. So, there's relative scarcity, and that's going to drive demand and price in relation to that sort of highly inelastic supply. So yeah, people understand, of course, as well that Knoebel's work is about color, and some of the color harmonies that you get within these paintings are more attractive and more melodic than others. Sometimes when he's looking to try and explore dissonance between the colors, so that you have what feels rather inharmonious, or perhaps a certain awkward juxtaposition between the tones that doesn't feel as attractive or as obvious. Now, this is clearly part of his intentionality for the work, but people often prize prettier things over more uncomfortable things, and ones that are overtly pretty with a nice range of very harmonious colors will probably perform better than one that has almost no color or that has very dark or muddy colors.
So, how important would you say that Emil Knoebel is when we're speaking art history? Did he find his place already?
Of course, without question. I mean, you look at you can trace this lineage of color theory all the way through from the early part of the 20th century. Of course, you've got these titans, Mandarin and Malevich, and then you've got the Bauhaus, which the importance of the Bauhaus, in my view, can't be overstated, just because of the way that it formed the wellspring for so many other kinds of things to come from it in the 20th century. And, you can trace Knoebel directly through this, through the course that he taught. I think when you look at conceptual painters and abstract painters coming out of Germany in the middle of the 20th century, you can't really look past, Gerhard Richter as the greatest of them all. But if you look at the generation that is, the same age essentially that kind of came out of that, then you look at Ferg and Palermo and Knoebel as the 3 great artists. And I think that you can't really create too much of a distinction between any of those 3 as one being of greater repute or achievement than another. So, you have to say that Knoebel is an extremely seminal abstract painter of this period, who's still, working at a very high level today. So yes, he's found his place, and he's, performed, an immeasurable contribution to abstract painting in the 20th century.
For listeners who want to delve more into Emil Knoebel's works, where should they start, and what should they look for? Special periods, special works, or?
Well, I think there's clear bodies of work that Knoebel has made. I mean, we mentioned that he works serially, so I think just understanding these main bodies of work is a good way to get an overview of what his objectives are. If you look at the DEAR website, they have really interesting and fantastic holdings of historic works and a really, really nice descriptions that sort of summarize what each one is about. That's a really good way to get a fundamental understanding of Knoebel's work. So I would recommend that as a good source of research. And then I think if you look at the gallery websites, I always enjoy Ropak's website just because they have a really nice way of showing the chronological sequence of exhibitions. So you can kind of click into each show in sequence, see how one body of work evolves out of a preceding one, and then you've got press releases that pertain to each show, and often video content where scholars and the artist indeed also engaged in conversation, talking about the work. So that's a really nice way of kind of consuming information about his work in a somewhat sort of entertaining content format. And then Von Barthe and White Cube too have got really good overviews on him and his practice.
Great, Nick. Thanks once again for picking your brain. Do you think we missed anything? Anything to add?
I mean, listen, we could talk about his work all day. He's been working for, more than 50 years. So it'd be easy to get more of a deep dive. But I think as an overview, as a way of summarizing, what he's about and what he's done and how he's perceived by the market, I think, we've ticked most of the boxes today.
Good. Thank you. Well, that's it for us, I guess.
It is.
And then let's hope there will be a listener for the next episode.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you. Bye. If you have any questions or any requests, you are more than welcome to write to us at info@nordicartpartners.com, and we will do what we can to help you. Thanks for listening, and we hope to have you back for our next episode. Goodbye.